impact some business problem. And our strategy is going to be to take a connection approach or a collection approach. And oftentimes you're going to need both of those. So connecting is getting people what they need when they need it, whether it's access to an expert, and access to a best practice, and access to a community of practice that has the expert sitting into it. So I think your three standard or very classic approaches, no, we not call them standard, well, they are standard, but your classic approaches that people use over and over again are communities of practice or networks, knowledge sharing networks. They use lessons learned, and they use the transfer of best practices. I think that, and then enabled by some type of information technology that helps us out. So those are the three classic things that we can, through quantitative evidence and qualitative stories, because the stories link that causation and effect together, show the value and the impact of those. So those, I think you have to have some defined approaches. I think you have to have some kind of tool. If you're trying to do this across the globe or different locations, you're going to have some decent portal tool or some type of social media. And I think you're going to have a good plan, that a business case that builds the engagement and participation of people into that. So you're not going to get away, and some organizations today are confusing knowledge management with records management. I mean, think about records and information and knowledge. Those are all very different things. You manage them all very differently. So don't get confused by trying to lump all of that under the banner of knowledge management, because it's a different set of competencies required. So it's really that connection and collection.
Sure. You're right.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I think this is a really fascinating field. I've seen instances of knowledge management done well in the organization, but I think one of the real challenges is just the information overload aspect, because it seems like we're almost always going to the next good idea. So we've got Millbook, MillWiki, we've got the SharePoint, we've got just a huge abundance of information overload. In fact, we got to the point in Europe when I was both with NATO and with USERR that even action officers and OPTs were standing up their own knowledge management sites and such. I guess my question is, without some kind of ubiquitous search capability like a Google or a YouTube or something, how do you manage, really? I mean, I guess you do that within the parameter and the framework of your knowledge management program, but what is your advice to organizations in terms of managing the information overload aspects of a program like this that actually takes off and starts to just have a database, a repository of information and links and URLs? How do you manage the access to that information?
So, I wish there were just a really simple answer. I'm going to build on what I just shared with the gentleman. I think that it is true. I think what the overload of information has done has made us pay more attention to what is the really valuable information and all of that, because there's just so much out there. And I think your information strategy has to be part of what kind of records, what kind of information is going to be important to our organization to encapsulate, to collect it, and to have someone who watches it and makes sure that it stays fresh and current, so that, because if it's not, people are not going to ever come there and use it again. And I don't know that there is an answer for what tool is perfect to use. I think search does. I think there's some features with search that do help you wade through a lot of the information we have internally in our organization. So I think that is one answer that people are really looking to. I think taxonomies are another way that people are dealing with just the sheer volume of information overload. And I'm not just taxonomies that are at high level that nobody knows what they mean, but taxonomies that are in the language of the way your organization thinks. And I'd say that in a tongue in cheek, because we all think so differently. But to have an organizing structure that has business rules around it, so when it does get captured and tagged, people have a very clear understanding, and the communication that goes behind that. So I think those are a few things that they're doing. There's not one simple answer.
I've got a virtual question.
Yes, sir.
Posed by myself here, if I'm pledging this.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say it's a when's lunch. I thought these virtual people were still hanging out.
It goes back to the comment made by a few earlier, Cindy, in terms of the notion of knowledge is power. And I think we've all grown up, and I think it's still a true statement that individual knowledge pursuit, the gaining of that knowledge is something to be rewarded, because that's how we grow and develop. But organizationally, the power lies in the exchange. Very similar to currency. Hoarding money doesn't do any value to the economy unless it's exchanged for value. But in terms of KM, where many of our efforts are organically birthed, but morph into knowledge sharing as it should be across organizational boundaries. And you're stuck in an organization, I'll use a very demonstrative example, that's got 200 folks. And whereas if I were focusing my KM program on 200 folks, got it, I've got my arms around that. But your community is 200,000 folks in organizations across the globe. How do you wrestle with explaining that in a business case to leadership and being able to successfully use the power of that in a model that really is centered around last century thinking in terms of management structure and organizational structure and such? It doesn't fit. It's like putting a square peg in a round hole. So how do you see organizations wrestling with that?
You know what? ConocoPhillips has actually done a really good job with this, I think. So their community, their knowledge sharing networks, I mean, we call them communities, they're big. And they're across the globe, but it's discipline specific. So very focused on whether it be drilling or reservoir engineering. So they're very discipline specific, but know that that information needs to get out to other disciplines to use. They really leveraged the 2.0, Web 2.0 tools to make some of this available. So now it's not saying put the tool in and it happens. They have accountability behind the processes. So when something new is discovered or there's a best practice, there's an evaluation of that says, does this need to get pushed out? So a little bit of a, look at this before we push it so we're not overloading people. And how would they use it? That group of experts is responsible for putting it into what they call their one wiki. And it's not just a long, continuous, arduous deal that it's hard to go through, but it's very pointed and categorized in taxonomy, a little bit kind of contradictory of the wiki notion. But it allows people to free flow that information very broadly outside of that localized view. Because face it, as a business leader, you don't have time to talk to everybody. You don't have time to talk to 200 people a day. So you've got to use these tools as what they are, a tool to help you do something. But there's got to be good. MITRE is the other one. They do a fabulous job of using their technology, but when you peel back the layers and look at the people and the resources, or the accountability, I should say, because the people are doing their jobs, but the accountability and the processes that are behind to allow that information to get put out broadly, it's phenomenal. And that's what really, I think, is the difference between just putting the tool out there and really using the tool to sort of support your business. Did I get that the hard way?
Yeah, I think the adoption of social networking within the organization is starting to push this harder.
Yeah.
Because if we're going to really capitalize on the expertise and talent of the folks in an organization, you've got to recognize all of their nodes of knowledge sources they're tied into and how to use that for a purpose. But justifying a 200-man organization, here's how many folks I need, minimal as it might be, gets a little bit more complicated when you're supporting 200,000 who aren't contributing to the resourcing of that effort, but they are sources you can tap into. So.
Absolutely. Well, and you know what, the whole notion of Facebook. Everybody wants to create a Facebook. Well, I mean, don't create a Facebook. We have a Facebook. It's called Facebook. Everybody's using it. In fact, the kids are getting off of it. I hate to tell you, they're bored with all this old people on it. But they, but think about how you use these tools. I mean, how many thought SharePoint was going to be our wildly big collaboration space? that we were all going to use and go cloud. You were smart. We all thought we put it up and everybody would just run to it. And it lasted about 2 weeks. And we're still with it. But it's, I think it gets back incumbent to the knowledge manager to look at the requirements of making it relevant and using the tools effectively opposed to just putting them out there. That's the big strategy we're talking about. Have time for more?
Got time for 2 more questions.
Always
Right?
in the way.
I was wondering if there was any strategy for measuring the value of content and some metrics associated with it. Like, say, for instance, if it was posted by an SME, how many people actually downloaded it, viewed it, thumbs up, thumbs down, kind of thing?
That's a good point. His question was good. Can you measure the value of content? Right, I would say, sir, right now we're really looking at the feedback we get. So it is how many times it's used, and if you're really serious, you're going to trace the value tab and track that impact on when it was used. So in very discrete project-like settings. A lot of organizations are using the thumbs up, thumbs down, and getting user feedback to look at the qualitative value, the anecdotal value that people are having. The other thing I think, that, again, going back to our social, web tools, being able to give that immediate feedback and push it out so quickly has been one of the things that we've learned over pattern. In fact, I heard, is this the year that our senior class is the class that grew up with all the Web 2.0 and networking? I just heard something about that today. So they don't know any different than how they actually work and interact with people. But as for actually measuring content, unless it's being applied to the business process, no, we have not looked. ABGC has not looked at that. Good question.
Sir, final question?
Dan Harper, Chief of Strategy for U.S. Army Medicine. Thank you. Nice presentation. The term social media has been thrown around here, and I'm curious, based on best practices from some of the ones that are in the higher maturity models, are they using social media from an internet side based on public use of social media, or are they using that more of an internal social media practice behind the firewalls within their own use of it?
Both. They're actually doing both. So a lot of them are adopting the concept of the wiki, SharePoint being part of the collaboration, being able to share documents, content, and connecting the people to content. But I think a lot of organizations are still in the external mode of just branding themselves externally through the use of like Facebook. The interactions with customer has been the real surprise in all of the external social media, because they've gotten a lot of great customer feedback from organizations in that higher maturity are using it, but they've adopted it on both sides. Yeah.
Thank you.
All
I
right.
want to thank everybody. Let's give
Thank you
Cindy
all very
a
much.
round.
One more slide. I had a chance to, I was actually after Dr. Chip Heath. He's wrote the book Switch and Made to Stick. And he talks about riding an elephant, the rider and the elephant. And the elephant is on its journey, and you've got to get on the elephant and ride and look for the bright sides and enjoy the journey. Thank you, guys.